Kia ora e te whānau, ko anu taku ingoa. Before I share my thoughts with you, I have two challenges that I need to mention to you. I'm mindful that I'm the last speaker for a much-needed break, and also Mike Treen's just been talking to you all, so that's quite a challenge, a hard act to follow on. But anyway, I'll try. Migrants, I guess, we've all been listening to the system that we live in, the economic system that we live in, capitalism. So the economy, the free market economy that the whole world lives in fact, barring one or two countries. One of the main conditions for this, the economy to thrive, is to have migrant workers. And we all know people have been migrating, moving around for centuries. But in the contemporary context, migration has been packaged and marketed as a pathway to a better life, full of opportunities in other countries that are more developed than people's home countries. So as such, it's in the interest of the market economy to keep those people temporary and keep them temporary for as long as they can and not provide any stability. So Mike mentioned towards the end, the 6 points that he mentioned, that we have I think about 350,000 people in Aotearoa who are on temporary visas. So it's in the interest of the market to keep those people on those temporary visas, because that's the only way the system can profit from those migrants. So the system, or I should say various governments over the years in New Zealand, have really had no interest in providing... So they don't intend to make these people permanent. And that's how the cycle goes on. And we've get several cases, I should say hundreds, in the recent weeks due to COVID-19 pandemic. So we get these case studies, people reaching out to us, people on temporary visas. And in many cases, they've been here for 10 years quite easily, more than 10 years. And like it was mentioned, they have children who are born in New Zealand. Those children go to school here, and they don't know anywhere else as home. New Zealand is home for these people. However, our immigration policies are designed, like I said, as well as the market, the immigration policies are designed to keep these migrants in a zone of uncertainty, and that this prolongs and drags out the pain. And also, every time we get a new government, or leading up to elections, the irony is these people are not voters, but every election they get used as political footballs. People who cannot vote themselves become an election issue. So we're seeing that at the moment as well. I'll explain that further on. So each time a new government comes in, they reset the immigration policies, the rules. So people who've been on a journey, on a pathway to residence, they've been here 5-10 years, they get about this close to achieving that goal, the rules get changed on them. So the goalpost keeps moving. And the whole thing restarts. It starts all over again. And people lose out. I think the people are invested emotionally, socially, financially. It costs a lot to maintain their immigration status here. And the other big thing that we've been fighting against for the last 10 or so years is migrant exploitation. I'm sure you would have all seen news articles, or there hasn't been a week that goes by without an exploitation case being in media. So our current government, soon after they came into power in 2017, they enlisted the help of some academics, namely Dr. Christina Stringer and Professor Francis Collins, and they led the government-initiated research into migrant exploitation. This happened end of 2018, beginning of 2019. And then they interviewed all the stakeholders. They interviewed the exploited workers themselves. Now, I really want to congratulate those workers because they were very brave. You have to imagine this. A person who's on a temporary visa here, their work visa is attached to their employer, the employer who keeps threatening them. They're made to work extra hours there. They're paid well below the legal minimum wage. And should they want to raise the issue with their employer, the threat is, we'll get your visa cancelled, we'll get you deported, and you'll go back home, and you'll be ruined forever. So these people suffer in silence. So for those people to actually step up and be brave enough and do the interviews, obviously it was all anonymous, but still, it was a big deal. So a lot of migrant workers took part in those interviews, to the extent that Francis and Christina had to extend their project because there was so much interest in the interviews. Sorry. So they also interviewed organizations like ourselves. They interviewed people from the union movement, because to date we've seen it's mostly been the trade unions who've been standing up for migrants' rights. And they also employed, interestingly enough, some employers too. There weren't that many, but there were some employers who were interviewed. So in July 2019, their outcome of their research was published as a report, which sits on the MBIE website. It was kept very quiet. It was about 6 months later that we found out the research has been published. So one of the findings, the key finding of this research was exploitation of temporary migrant workers mostly takes place when their visas are attached to their employers. So that was the outstanding finding of the research. But did anything change as a result of the research? No. The visas continue to be attached. So, there's no political will here to change that scenario. So we keep seeing the cycle repeating. The migrant workers keep getting exploited. And there's much talk within migrant communities about, the workers kind of put, that they are complicit as well. That's what a lot of the migrant communities say. But there is no other way these workers can progress on their pathway to residence here. They have to go through being attached to their employers, so they have to expose themselves to exploitation. So really, it's a no-brainer that the visas should be opened up, stop attaching visas. And also, we don't do that to our Kiwi workers. We don't enslave other workers like that, so why do it to migrant workers? Another thing that is promoted quite a lot is that the workers, vulnerable migrant workers, have routes available to them through government departments and agencies. MBIE has the Labour Inspectorate, they have the Employment Relation Authority that these workers can contact. Up until recently, every time a worker whistle blew or made a complaint, what it meant was straight away the employer would fire them. They would lose their job, meaning that their visa would not be valid. And the next thing they would know is they would get a deportation order from Immigration New Zealand. So why would you whistleblow if you risk being thrown out of the country? So, they were just suffering in silence. They continue to do that. So recently there has been some change where visas are opened up, or it's changed to a visitor visa, interestingly enough. So, that doesn't help them. They need to be able to work to survive here. But anyway, they can stay here lawfully. But the problem is, through the government departments, it can take easily up to 2 years for a case to be heard. So, what is a person on a visitor visa supposed to do in this country for 2 years? How do they live? So, that's it's not acceptable. So I mentioned unions. Unions seem to be the only organizations really sticking up for migrant workers' rights. We've found over the years union membership is generally a lot lower than it used to be. Mike explained well, how we were in the 70s and 80s and unions were strong. I won't go into that. There's not enough time. So generally there's not as many people join unions, but in the migrant workers sector, it's even lower. So there's another threat that exploiting employers use, that don't you dare join the union, we'll fire you or we'll punish you in some way or another if you join a union. So the membership is extremely low, if any at all. And also, I think increasingly unions have been under a lot of pressure too, and therefore what happens is they've got to weigh up whether, they look after their members or should they go and represent non-members who are being exploited. So then what happens is a lot of the work comes to organizations like ourselves. There are a couple of other organizations who do similar work to Migrant Workers Association. So we are only as good as our team, so we're quite under-resourced as well. So that's a problem in itself. The other issue is, as the unions have not been, they've been becoming less and less strong over decades, there are many sectors that don't even have a union that would cover the workers. And traditionally, most of the migrant workers work in medium to small businesses and in sectors that don't really have any unions covering them. So that's quite an issue that needs to be addressed. So that's a bit of background to what's been happening and the work that we do. So moving on to the current situation with COVID-19 and how migrant workers have been impacted there. It's wonderful that our team of 5 million has been successful in beating COVID-19, and our Prime Minister has said that so many times, and New Zealand is a number one example internationally. I have family in India and in the UK, and every time I speak to them, they always mention how New Zealand has done so well here. So that's really good. But I think we must not forget that there are about 350,000 temporary visa workers who are also part of that 5 million, and they've been just allowed to fall. They've been allowed to fall through the cracks. And about 40,000 of those 350,000 have been stranded offshore ever since our border was closed. So that's quite a large number, 40,000. I think it was 42,000, so about 2,000 or so, or just under 3,000, have been allowed to come back because they had exceptional circumstances or on humanitarian grounds. But I also know around 15 to 20,000 of those people applied to get an exception, but only about 3,000 were allowed in. So these people, I just want to take a couple of minutes to explain who these people are and what their situation is right now. So their primary place of residence is New Zealand. Like I said before, some of them have been here 10 or more years, have children who are born here. So their personal belongings are here. Their furniture, their qualification certificates, appliances, cars, items of sentimental value, and the homes or the flats that they rent. They're still paying rent. They're still paying all their bills here, as well as wherever they're stuck. So they're paying two lots of bills. And it's not their fault. And there are also cases where families have been apart. So say mum or dad went back to their home country to visit a sick parent or for whatever reason, then children are here, the other parent is here, so there are families who are separated as well. And in many of those cases, they've made applications to Immigration New Zealand requesting that, this is a humanitarian issue. Like, there's young school-going children, primary school-age children kept apart from their parents. So they're not getting exceptions to travel. They're just being told that the border is only open to citizens and residents. You are basically last on this priority list. So these people make a very good point. That they all think, we're all humans and we are equally in this, and they're part of the 5 million. And, they all say time and time again that the virus does not discriminate based on people's immigration status. We all present the same sort of risk when we come into New Zealand, and these people are willing to go into quarantine to the extent that they will pay for their own quarantine. So really there needs to be some sort of priority as to who comes in and who doesn't, instead of based on immigration status. And just fast forwarding on, migrant workers on temporary visas who are here, that they've had a really rough ride as well. We've had the wage subsidy, but a lot of them have been exploited again, where the employer has pocketed the wage subsidy. It hasn't been passed on to the workers. And then those who have lost jobs or been made redundant, they do not have the safety of social welfare because they're not eligible for unemployment benefit through work and income. So that's a problem in itself. I know you possibly are aware that government has provided some relief packages, but it's been in the order of where during level 4 lockdown, migrants have been made to queue up for free food packs. I mean, that was a risk, not just to the migrants themselves, but to all of us in New Zealand. You know, why make people be in such close contact? Why not just give them the money that then they can use to buy the food? Why make them queue up for a free food pack? I mean, it's not a dignified way of doing it in the first place. It's humiliation. There's also been recently announced Red Cross relief package. It's from the government, but delivered by Red Cross. A few days ago, there was a news article I was reading written by the Human Rights Commission of New Zealand, who have deemed that package inadequate. It does not address the needs of the migrants and the way it's being delivered. Again, food vouchers and things like that. It's not dignified. So fast forwarding on, moving on, solutions. You know, where do we see migrants in an alternative Aotearoa? I mean, we believe migrants must be treated as equals and have the same rights as citizens and permanent residents. And to achieve that, a pathway to resident for all temporary migrants already in Aotearoa must be provided. So I just want to remind you, I'm only talking about people who are already here. We're not talking about more migrants coming in. People who are already here must be allowed to stay. And also union rights. You know, generally the workers are much more empowered and engaged to fight for their rights when they are members of a rank-and-file-led union. Better unionization of not just migrant workers, all workers. That's what we need. And just a couple of final points. You know, there are some immediate needs that have to be fulfilled here. So all work visas attached to employers need to be opened so that people who are here and are jobless can actually move to the work. I mean, we've seen articles from the dairy industry, from pig farmers, from orchards, where they can't actually find workers. They can't find the Kiwi workers that government keeps saying, you know, Kiwis must be given the work first. So if migrant workers are here, they can do those jobs, they can move around. So open up their visas. All temporary migrants stranded offshore due to border closure, they just need some sort of reassurance that whenever the border reopens, they'll be allowed to come back. They are not asking for the border to be opened especially for them. They just need reassurance that they'll be able to come back whenever we reopen. And then about the benefits for the jobless. Our Social Security Act has a provision. There's a section in there, Section 64. The government just needs to put that into implementation because in a pandemic emergency situation, they can do that so that every person can have access to benefits. So we request that that's enacted. And then we talked about racism quite a lot. There's a lot of institutionalized racism at Immigration New Zealand, which we've seen over the years, that people are racially profiled. Applicants from certain countries, especially India, are targeted, and they have the highest decline rate for visa applications. And also there's a very, very long-standing visa processing delays. I mean, in this current situation of rising unemployment, just resource your departments better. Like I mentioned the labour inspectorates before. Give people work. And then that way you minimize your processing delays as well. Create more work. Give people more jobs. And finally, you know, the whole economic system, capitalism, it's designed to keep the workforce divided. So we believe that the only way to fight this is to unite, and migrants are an important piece of this jigsaw, and we all need to unite so that we can fight this system that relies on making profits for the few, and the alternative has to be to unite as workers and put people before profit.
Tēnā koe whaia.